Welcome to the channel. Today, I'm sharing an extraordinary story about a near-death experience that revealed shocking visions of humanity's future, starting in 2025. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Let's get started. My name is Ilara Hensley, and what I'm about to share with you is something that changed my life forever. I'm just an ordinary person, living a quiet life in Boulder, Colorado, with my family. I'm not a writer, a speaker, or a mystic. I'm just someone who experienced something extraordinary in the summer of 1998. That event left a deep impression on me, and to this day, I have trouble finding the right words to describe it. But here's my attempt. The summer of 1998 was unusually warm in Boulder, Colorado. The kind of heat that seemed to hang in the air even after the sun had set, turning the evening sky into a canvas of gold and lavender. I remember that night so vividly. Nick and I were driving along Highway 36. The windows rolled down to let the wind cool our faces, though it didn't help much. The air smelled of asphalt and distant pine trees, a scent I'd come to associate with the drive between Boulder and Denver. The plan was simple: head to a party downtown, laugh, and forget for a while about the struggles we both carried silently. Nick was humming along to the radio, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm with a classic rock song. I glanced at him and laughed. "You're offbeat, you know," I teased, nudging his arm. "Yeah, but look at me," he replied with a grin. "I've got charm to make up for it." We'd known each other since college, and while life had pulled us in different directions over the years, nights like this reminded me why our friendship endured. There was an ease between us, an unspoken understanding, but that night, there was also a peculiar tension I couldn't quite place. Something in the air felt different. The moment happened so quickly, yet it felt like an eternity. One second, we were joking about the lyrics of a song, and the next, the blinding glare of headlights filled the car. "Nick, watch out!" I screamed, but it was too late. The sound of screeching tires tore through the night as the bus veered directly into our lane. The collision was brutal. Metal crunched and glass shattered around us. I felt a force so violent, it seemed to rip the air from my lungs. Time itself slowed down. It was as though the universe had pressed pause, allowing me to see, think, and feel in excruciating detail. In that suspended moment, my mind raced through a montage of my life. Faces of people I loved, my parents, my sister, even a stray dog I'd once befriended in college, flashed before me. Regrets surfaced like shadows. The apologies I'd never made, the dreams I'd left unfulfilled, the words I'd been too afraid to say. A sense of deep sorrow wrapped itself around me. Was this how it ended? When time resumed, the world exploded back into chaos. The deafening roar of the crash filled my ears, then silence. My body felt weightless, detached from the crumpled mass of metal that had once been Nick's car. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard him shouting my name, his voice frantic. But I couldn't respond. I couldn't move. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes, but it wasn't like before. The scene around me was impossibly vivid, more real than real life. My body wasn't there, at least, not the way I knew it to be. Instead, I felt light, unburdened, and yet completely aware. Below me, the scene unfolded with startling clarity. The car, a mangled wreck of metal and shattered glass, sat sideways on the highway. Smoke curled into the air as headlights from other vehicles illuminated the chaos. I saw Nick, bloodied but moving, crawling out of the car, shouting my name in panic. "Stay with me, Ilara! Don't you dare leave me!" His voice was desperate, hoarse, the sound tearing through the surreal quiet I felt suspended in. I should have panicked seeing myself there, trapped, motionless, my face pale and lips slightly parted. Yet I felt no fear, no pain. It was as though a warm current of air surrounded me, lifting me higher above the scene. There was peace, a kind of calm so profound that it silenced the part of my mind that would have otherwise screamed in terror. What struck me most wasn't the wreck or Nick's frantic movements, but the clarity with which I perceived everything. I could see the shards of glass glinting like tiny diamonds on the pavement. I could hear the faint hum of approaching sirens, even though I was too far to make out the vehicles. Every detail seemed magnified, sharper than anything I had ever experienced. Then I felt it, an embrace, but not physical. Arms unseen yet tangible wrapped around me, pulling me into a state of complete comfort. It was as if the very essence of love itself had manifested to hold me. There were no words, no voices, only the profound assurance that I was safe. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had died. The thought didn't frighten me, though. Instead, I felt a strange curiosity, as if I were a traveler stepping into an undiscovered world. My perspective shifted. I saw the scene below from even higher now, watching the paramedics arrive and the small crowd of bystanders that had gathered. One of them, a woman in a blue dress, had her hands clasped in prayer. Her whispered words, though inaudible, radiated upward toward me, and I somehow understood her intention. Please let her live. Despite the peace I felt, I couldn't help but focus on Nick. He was refusing to let the paramedics pull him away, insisting they tend to me first. His voice cracked as he yelled, "She's not breathing, do something!" I tried to reach for him, to tell him I was all right, but my movements, or lack thereof, didn't translate. My hands, if I still had them, didn't obey me. All I could do was watch and feel the growing warmth of the presence that surrounded me. The world below began to dim slightly, as if I were being drawn away from it, the sirens and cries fading into a distant hum. Then it happened. A pull, soft but undeniable. It felt as if I were being guided gently, a current carrying me away from the wreckage and toward a new horizon. The peace deepened. I surrendered to it, knowing instinctively that wherever I was going, I wasn't alone. The pull was gentle but deliberate, like an unseen hand guiding me away from the chaos. The world below, the mangled car, the flashing lights, Nick's anguished cries, faded into a soft blur. What replaced it was something indescribable. It wasn't darkness, nor was it light in the way we know it. It was a space that felt endless, expansive, and safe, as though I had been wrapped in the very fabric of the universe. And then, like the dawn breaking over a still horizon, light began to emerge. It started faint, a warm golden hue on the edge of my perception. Slowly, it grew brighter, enveloping me in its radiance. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. It was alive, pulsing gently, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of love and serenity. Every worry, every fear, every lingering regret dissolved in its presence. Ahead, a shape began to form, growing clearer with each passing moment. It was a city, not like any city I had ever seen, but one that felt oddly familiar. The structures seemed to glow from within, as if they were made of crystalline glass infused with light. Towers rose gracefully into the sky, their forms both delicate and monumental. Streets shimmered like rivers of gold, and the air itself seemed to hum with an energy that resonated deep within me. I drifted closer, drawn not just by curiosity, but by a deep sense of belonging. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I knew, without anyone telling me, that I was meant to be here. As I approached, a figure appeared in the distance. At first, it was little more than a silhouette against the brilliance of the city, but as I drew nearer, details began to emerge. The figure was tall and luminous, its form radiating a soft, warm glow that seemed to emanate from within. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, and yet it felt so natural, so comforting. The being had no wings, no halo, none of the traditional imagery one might associate with an angel, but its presence was undeniably divine. "Welcome, Alara," it said, its voice soft yet resonant, like the gentle strum of a harp combined with the soothing rhythm of ocean waves. It didn't speak with words, exactly. The communication was deeper, more direct, as if the words were imprinted onto my soul rather than heard. "Where am I?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking aloud or simply thinking the question. The being smiled, a gesture so full of understanding and compassion that I felt tears well up, though I didn't seem to have a body to cry from. "You are in a place between," it replied, "a place of rest and reflection." The city behind it shimmered invitingly, but the being raised a hand, halting my progress. "Before you enter, there is something you must see." With a wave of its hand, the golden air around us began to ripple like water disturbed by a pebble. In an instant, I was no longer standing before the city, but surrounded by a different kind of light, softer, more intimate. Shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, filled not with books, but with scrolls and tablets, each one glowing faintly with its own inner light. "This is the library," the being said. "Here lies the story of every soul, past, present, and future." I stared in awe, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I was seeing. The shelves seemed to extend beyond the limits of my vision, their contents organized with an order that was both intricate and effortless. It was a place of pure knowledge, a record of all that had ever been and ever would be. The being gestured toward a nearby scroll, which floated down from the shelf as though summoned. As it unrolled, golden symbols began to shimmer across its surface, forming images and words I instantly recognized. It was my story. The scroll hovered before me, its edges glowing faintly like the embers of a fire. I hesitated, unsure of what I would see within its delicate, radiant folds. The being beside me nodded softly, encouraging me without words. With a breath, I didn't realize I could take in this ethereal form. I reached toward it, or perhaps it reached toward me. The scroll unfurled, and my life spilled out before me, not in words, but in moments. Scenes emerged, vivid and immediate. My childhood came first. The way my mother's laugh used to fill our small kitchen, the feel of sunlight on my skin during lazy summer afternoons in the backyard. These memories were so tangible that I could almost hear the clinking of ice in my lemonade glass and feel the warmth of the family dog curled beside me. But then came moments I had long buried, arguments with my sister over petty things, a friendship I had let fall away because I was too proud to apologize, a love I never pursued because I was too afraid to be vulnerable. The scroll didn't judge or condemn. It simply showed everything as it was, raw, unfiltered truth. The being stood quietly beside me, allowing me to absorb it all. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice trembling under the weight of my own life. "To understand," it replied, "to grow." The next scene caught me by surprise. It was the night of the accident. I saw myself laughing with Nick in the car, the way his smile lit up his face. Then, the crash, the metallic roar, the glass splintering, the moment I thought everything had ended. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of how fleeting life truly was. I had always known this on some level, but seeing it from this perspective made it impossible to ignore. The scroll shifted, revealing not just what I had done, but the ripples of those actions. I saw how a kind word I'd spoken to a stranger on the bus years ago had stopped him from taking his own life. I saw the impact of my decisions, both good and bad, as they radiated outward, touching people I'd never even met. I turned to the being, overwhelmed. "Every little thing matters, doesn't it?" It smiled, its light seeming to grow warmer. "Everything." As the scroll continued, a deeper truth began to emerge. It wasn't just about my life. It was about life itself, the challenges we face, the joys we savor, the moments we endure. Each one was a lesson, a step forward in the journey of the soul. I saw now that the pain and struggles I had resented were not punishments, but opportunities. They had shaped me, strengthened me, and, in their own way, prepared me for this very moment. The being gestured, and the scroll rolled itself closed, returning to the shelf with a gentle hum. "What now?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "Now you understand," it said, "but there is more to see." The shelves around us began to blur, their golden glow softening as the scene shifted again. The city reappeared in the distance, but this time, its light was eclipsed by something else. Before me, the air seemed to shimmer and fold, revealing visions so vivid and intense they took my breath away. The shimmering air began to part like a curtain, revealing a vision so clear it felt as though I were stepping directly into it. The warm light of the celestial city faded, replaced by an unsettling but awe-inspiring landscape. At first, it was difficult to comprehend what I was seeing. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted with colors both vivid and chaotic, fiery reds, deep blues, and ashen grays swirling together in a stormy symphony. It wasn't just a scene. It was a living, breathing tapestry of the Earth's future. The first images came rapidly, I saw towering waves crashing against coastal cities, swallowing buildings whole. Skyscrapers that had once stood tall and defiant crumbled under the relentless assault of water. Streets became rivers, people wading through the floods with desperation etched on their faces. I could feel their fear, their hopelessness, as though it were my own. Then the scene shifted. I was in the heart of a forest, but it wasn't the lush, vibrant green I had known. Instead, I saw flames. They consumed everything in their path, roaring with a ferocity that felt alive. The heat was palpable, even from where I stood, or floated, or observed. Animals fled in every direction, their cries piercing the oppressive crackle of burning wood. The sky above was a murky orange, choked with ash and smoke. As I absorbed these images, a deep sorrow took hold of me. I turned to the being, who stood silently at my side, its presence a beacon of calm amidst the chaos. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why must I see so much suffering?" The being's voice was gentle but firm. "This is not meant to instill fear, but understanding. What you see is the result of choices made over generations. It is a turning point." The vision continued. I saw barren fields where crops once grew in abundance, the soil cracked and dry. People scavenged for food, their faces gaunt and weary. I saw winds tearing through cities, hurling debris like weapons, leaving devastation in their wake. The extremes of nature were unrelenting, floods in one place, droughts in another, as if the earth itself were crying out in agony. But just as the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me, the vision shifted again. Amid the destruction, I saw something unexpected: hope. In the aftermath of a hurricane, people of all backgrounds came together to rebuild their homes. Strangers shared food and shelter, bridging gaps that once divided them. Communities formed where none had existed before, united by necessity but sustained by compassion. In one scene, I saw a young girl planting a tree in a barren field, her small hands working diligently to nurture new life. Around her, others joined, their determination unyielding despite the challenges they faced. The air began to clear, the skies softening to shades of blue. It was as if the earth responded to their efforts, meeting their resilience with renewal. These events, the being explained, are not merely destruction, they are transformation. The earth and humanity are intertwined, and both must evolve. What you witness here is the beginning of that evolution. "When does it begin?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The being turned to face me fully, its radiant eyes meeting mine. "January 18th, 2025. On that day, a series of events will unfold that will challenge humanity to its core. But it will also awaken a deeper truth, a recognition of unity and purpose." I stood silently, absorbing the weight of this revelation. A mixture of awe, sorrow, and determination filled me. I understood now that the chaos wasn't an end. It was a new beginning. The visions began to fade, the swirling colors dissolving back into the golden light of the celestial city. My chest ached with the enormity of what I had seen, but a small ember of hope burned within me. Humanity was being given a chance, not an easy one, but a chance nonetheless. "You have seen enough," the being said, its voice steady and soothing. "Now, you must decide how you will carry this knowledge." The celestial city began to fade, and I found myself enveloped once more in the warm, golden light that seemed to carry me gently, like a river flowing toward an inevitable destination. The vision of the future still lingered in my mind, vivid and unshakable. Every scene of destruction, every act of resilience felt etched into my very soul. I turned toward the being, its radiant presence a constant source of calm amidst the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. "Is this goodbye?" I asked hesitantly, the words trembling as they left me. The being's expression softened, and though it didn't answer immediately, I could sense the gravity of what was about to happen. "Your journey here is coming to an end," it said gently. "But your work is just beginning." As it spoke, I noticed the golden light around me begin to dim, replaced by a different sensation, a heaviness, a pull back towards something familiar, yet distant. My body. I could feel its weight again, as though I were slipping back into a garment I hadn't worn in ages. "Why can't I stay?" I whispered, the question carrying with it both sadness and longing. The being stepped closer, its light brighter now, as though it wanted me to focus on its presence. "Because your time has not yet come. There is more for you to do, more for you to experience. Your life is a gift, not only for yourself, but for others." Before I could respond, the scene around me shifted. The golden light swirled and faded, revealing faint outlines of a hospital room. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the soft hum of machines began to replace the ethereal silence I had grown accustomed to. Voices filtered through, faint and distant at first, but growing clearer with each passing moment. "She's waking up!" someone exclaimed, the voice filled with equal parts relief and urgency. My eyelids fluttered open, heavy and unwilling, as though they were fighting against the weight of the world. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital stung my eyes, and for a moment, everything was a blur. I blinked several times until the shapes around me began to sharpen. My mother's tear-streaked face, her hand clutching mine as though it were the only thing anchoring her to this moment. "Ilara!" she cried, her voice breaking as she leaned closer. "Oh, thank God! We thought we'd lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw and dry, as though I hadn't used it in days. A nurse appeared at my side, adjusting the machines and murmuring something about my vitals stabilizing. I barely registered her words, my focus entirely on the faces around me. Nick stood at the foot of the bed, his arm in a sling and his face etched with guilt and exhaustion. "Ilara!" His voice cracked, and he looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it coming. I should have done something." I shook my head weakly, the motion small, but enough to convey what I couldn't say aloud. It wasn't his fault. None of it was. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to tell him about what I had seen, about the city of light, the visions of the future, and the being who had told me that my journey wasn't over. How could I explain something so profound, so otherworldly, when I barely understood it myself? The next hours passed in a haze of medical evaluations and cautious optimism. The doctors called my recovery miraculous, considering the severity of the accident. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt changed, as though part of me had stayed behind in that celestial realm, leaving a piece of myself tethered to something greater than this world. As the night wore on and the hospital quieted, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what I had seen pressed heavily on my chest. The future wasn't just a vision, it was a responsibility. I had been sent back with knowledge, a purpose I couldn't yet fully grasp. But one thing was clear. I had been given a second chance, and I couldn't waste it. In the silence of the hospital room, I whispered to myself, "I'll make it matter." Months passed, but the memories of my experience never faded. Every detail of the celestial city, the library, the visions of Earth's future, and the presence of the radiant being lingered with startling clarity. I began to wonder if those memories were meant to guide me in the days ahead. Life seemed both more precious and more fragile, and I vowed to live with intention, to honor the second chance I'd been given. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. It was nearly 2 years after the accident when I began to notice the changes. Subtle at first, fatigue, nausea, a faint feeling of warmth in my chest that wasn't entirely unpleasant. I brushed it off as stress or lingering effects from my injuries, but something inside me whispered otherwise. That whisper became a voice one night as I lay in bed, caught between wakefulness and sleep. "Ilara," the voice said, gentle but firm, like a parent waking a child from a deep slumber. I bolted upright, my heart racing. The room was dark, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I looked around, expecting to see someone standing there, but I was alone. And yet, the voice lingered, echoing in the depths of my mind. "You are ready." Ready for what? The question plagued me for days, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Then, one morning, the answer arrived in the form of 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. I stared at it, stunned, the weight of the revelation sinking in slowly. I was pregnant. Excitement and fear swirled within me in equal measure. I wasn't married, and while my family was supportive, I knew this would change everything. But amidst the uncertainty, there was a strange sense of peace. It felt as though this child was part of something larger, a continuation of the journey I had begun the night of the accident. The peace didn't last long. Around my 4th month of pregnancy, complications arose. Severe abdominal pain and dizzy spells sent me rushing to the doctor, who diagnosed me with a rare condition that put both my life and the baby's at risk. The news was devastating. I was placed on strict bed rest and told to prepare for the possibility of an early delivery, or worse. One particularly difficult night, as I lay awake in the dim light of my bedroom, the voice returned. It was softer this time, almost a whisper, but it carried the same unmistakable presence. "Go now," it urged. "Go where?" I whispered aloud, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what to do." The voice didn't answer, but a sudden sense of urgency gripped me. I grabbed my phone and called my doctor, explaining my symptoms in a panicked rush. He told me to come to the hospital immediately. Within hours, I was undergoing an emergency procedure that saved both my life and my baby's. The doctors marveled at the timing. "If you'd waited even a few more hours," one of them said, trailing off as though the alternative was too grim to put into words. I nodded, understanding all too well that someone, had guided me to act. Months later, my son was born healthy and strong despite the odds. Holding him for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He wasn't just a child. He was a reminder of the connection I had felt during my near-death experience, a living symbol of hope and resilience. The memory of the dream returned not long after his birth. I saw myself once more in the radiant field, standing with Jesus and the 2 children who had laughed and played around me. I realized now that one of them had been my son. The other, perhaps they were yet to come. The months following my son's birth were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless joy. Every cry, every tiny smile, every moment spent holding him in my arms felt like a gift, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But alongside the overwhelming love I felt as a new mother, there was a quiet transformation taking place within me. The experience of the accident, the visions, the voice that had saved us, it all lingered in my heart, shaping how I saw the world and my place in it. Before the accident, I had been like most people, driven by the day-to-day, caught up in worries about work, relationships, and the future. But now, every moment felt charged with meaning. Life wasn't just something to be lived, it was something to be cherished, examined, and shared. The fragility of existence had never been clearer to me, and because of that, its beauty shone even brighter. I began to notice the little things more, the way sunlight danced across my son's tiny hands as he reached for me, the sound of rain tapping against the window in the quiet hours of the night, the way my mother's face lit up whenever she held her grandson. These moments, small and fleeting, felt monumental. They were the threads that wove the tapestry of life, and I was determined never to take them for granted again. But the changes went deeper than a newfound appreciation for the present. The visions of the future, the transformation the being had shown me, stayed with me like a quiet drumbeat in the background of my thoughts. The date, January 18th, 2025, was etched into my memory, a marker of something yet to come. I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I felt an urgency to prepare, not in fear, but in purpose. I began to make subtle but intentional changes in my life. I simplified my daily routines, cutting out the noise and distractions that had once consumed me. I sought ways to live more sustainably, reducing waste and making choices that honored the earth. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I wanted to set an example for my son, to teach him the value of living in harmony with the world around us. Faith became a cornerstone of my life in a way it never had before. Though I didn't align myself with any particular religion, I felt a deep, unshakable connection to something greater, a force that had guided me through the darkest moments of my life and given me the strength to keep going. I found solace in prayer and meditation, moments of quiet where I could reflect and listen for that inner voice that had saved me more than once. My relationships also changed. I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years, offering apologies where they were needed and rebuilding bridges I had once let crumble. I forgave others and, perhaps most importantly, began the difficult work of forgiving myself. The being's words echoed in my mind. Everything matters. I realized that every interaction, no matter how small, had the potential to shape a life. I wanted my impact on others to be one of kindness and love. Still, I struggled at times. The weight of what I had seen, the destruction, the suffering, the resilience of humanity, was not easy to carry. Some nights, I lay awake, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was truly living up to the purpose I had been given. But in those moments, I reminded myself of the being's final words to me. Your journey is not yet over. I didn't have to have all the answers, not yet. What mattered was that I was trying, that I was moving forward, one step at a time. And so, I carried on, living each day with intention and gratitude, my son's laughter a constant reminder of the miracle of life. The future was uncertain, but I had faith that whatever lay ahead, I was exactly where I needed to be. As the years passed, life began to settle into a rhythm. My son grew from a curious infant into a bright, joyful child, filling our home with laughter and wonder. Each milestone he reached, his first steps, his first words, his first day of school, was a reminder of the fragile thread that connected us to this world. Every time I looked at him, I thought of how close I had come to losing it all, and I silently thanked the unseen forces that had guided me back. But even as I immersed myself in the joys and challenges of motherhood, the memory of my near-death experience never left me. The visions of the future, especially, lingered at the edges of my consciousness, resurfacing whenever I saw news reports about climate change or natural disasters. Each wildfire, hurricane, or flood felt like an echo of what I had been shown, a reminder of the fragile balance we were living on and the transformation that was drawing nearer. The date of January 18th, 2025, was seared into my mind. At first, it felt like a distant point on the horizon, something abstract and far away. But as the years slipped by, it loomed closer, its significance growing heavier with each passing day. I didn't know exactly what would happen on that day, but I felt its weight in my bones, like the calm before a storm. I began to prepare, though not in the way one might expect. I didn't stockpile supplies or build a bunker. Instead, I focused on strengthening my relationships, fostering a sense of community, and teaching my son the values I hoped would guide him through any challenges ahead. Compassion, resilience, and gratitude became the foundation of our lives. I wanted him to grow up understanding that even in the face of adversity, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to come together. As the date approached, I found myself reflecting more often on the words the being had spoken to me. This is not merely destruction, it is transformation. The visions I had seen were not just of suffering but of renewal, people rebuilding, reconnecting, and rediscovering what truly mattered. I held on to that hope, even as the world around me seemed increasingly fractured. On the night of January 17th, 2025, I couldn't sleep. The air felt charged, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside, the world blanketed in an eerie stillness. My son slept soundly in the next room, his tiny frame rising and falling with each breath. I whispered a silent prayer, not for myself, but for him, for the world he would inherit. When midnight struck, I felt it, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible but undeniable. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but a deep, instinctual knowing. The change had begun. The hours that followed were quiet, but the world seemed different. By morning, reports began to trickle in. Unusual weather patterns, sudden seismic activity, strange phenomena that defied explanation. It was subtle at first, like the opening notes of a symphony, but it was clear that something was happening. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was an undeniable sense of possibility. People began to reach out to one another in ways they hadn't before. Strangers helped each other navigate the chaos, offering shelter, food, and comfort. Conversations about sustainability, compassion, and unity took on new urgency. It was as if the world had been given a chance to reset, to rewrite its story. As I watched the events unfold, I felt a deep sense of purpose settle over me. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that I had been prepared for this moment, not to lead, but to live as an example, to show, in whatever small way I could, that transformation was possible, and that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found. The date had arrived, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. I didn't know how the story would end, but I had faith in the resilience of the human spirit, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The days following January 18th, 2025, unfolded like a ripple in a still pond. The events that began that morning, unpredictable weather, strange atmospheric shifts, and the subtle but undeniable movement of the earth, sent shockwaves through the world. People were scared, unsure of what was happening or how to respond. Yet, amidst the fear, something extraordinary began to take shape. It started small, as most profound changes do. In my neighborhood, people who had barely spoken before began to knock on each other's doors, offering assistance and checking in. I saw strangers helping each other clear snow from driveways and gathering supplies for those who couldn't venture out. It was as if the barriers that had once kept us apart, differences in politics, beliefs, or simple indifference, were melting away under the pressure of shared uncertainty. I felt it in myself too. The sense of urgency that had hung over me for years since my experience was no longer an abstract concept. It was here, now. The transformation I had been shown was beginning, and it was no longer a question of if, but how we would respond. I knew my role was small, but it was no less important. I began hosting informal gatherings in my home, inviting neighbors to share their concerns, resources, and ideas. My son, now old enough to understand the gravity of what was happening, helped in his own way. He set up a station in the living room where he drew pictures for anyone feeling scared, his innocent creativity a reminder of the hope and resilience that still existed in the world. As weeks turned into months, the shifts continued, both in the natural world and within humanity. The Earth's warnings became impossible to ignore: rising seas, unrelenting storms, and a climate in flux. But what stood out most wasn't the destruction, it was the response. People didn't retreat into fear and selfishness as I might have once expected. Instead, they leaned into each other, finding strength in community and collaboration. I thought often of the being I had met in the celestial city and its words about transformation. This was exactly what it had shown me: how challenges, even those that seemed insurmountable, could become catalysts for growth. I saw it in the way communities rebuilt together, planting trees where there was once barren land, creating systems to share resources equitably, and reimagining cities to work in harmony with nature rather than against it. One night, as I sat by the fire with my son asleep in my lap, I reflected on how far we had come. The weight of my near-death experience no longer felt like a burden, but a gift. It had prepared me for this moment, not as a leader or savior, but as a witness and participant in humanity's awakening. I was grateful for the chance to live through this time, to see the resilience and beauty of the human spirit emerge from the chaos. There were still challenges ahead, there always would be, but I no longer felt afraid. The visions I had been given showed not just destruction, but the possibility of renewal. And now, I was living that possibility. I saw it in the faces of my neighbors as we worked together to plant a community garden. I saw it in the laughter of children playing in streets once empty and lifeless. I saw it in my son's eyes, bright with curiosity and hope for the future. In the quiet moments, I still felt the presence of the being who had guided me, as though it were watching from afar, its light a constant reminder of the journey we were all on. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: life was a gift, a fragile, beautiful miracle meant to be cherished and shared. As I kissed my son goodnight and lay down to rest, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for the second chance I had been given, for the people around me, and for the earth that continued to teach us, challenge us, and sustain us. My journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next.